My name's Mark Sutton, and I was the agent, construction manager and finally project manager for the M1 Junction 19 improvement scheme. A project which has lasted about 8 years of my life, and one I'm very proud to say is now open. And also, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for the Major Projects Award earlier in the year as well. So yeah, 8 years of my life going through the early planning, preliminary design, public inquiry, construction and completion. So through this presentation, I'll take you through an introduction to the scheme, talk to you about the many different players, the parties involved, the team that got this scheme up and running, go through the history of the scheme as well, the sort of trials and tribulations to actually get it out on the ground, and also some of the design and construction challenges that we faced, obviously in one of the key nodes in the middle of the country. Look at a couple of logistical constraints and also a rather exciting and interesting bridge demolition that had to take place. Then go through project achievements, some of the success stories and also the outcomes of the scheme. So to start with the project team, if you cast your mind back to 2005, that was when Skanska and Jacobs were awarded the early contractor involvement contract with the then Highways Agency. Highways Agency, now Highways England, was supported by AECOM as the technical assurance and supervisor under the contract, Parsons Brigham and WSP as commercial assurance, and Mouchel were appointed as the road safety auditors and the then CDM coordinator. So we all came together in 2005, and the first phase of the ECI project was the development of a number of different solutions to the problem at Catthorpe, and involved presenting at public consultations, and then a preferred route was announced. Unfortunately, due to budget interferences in around about 2010 and the budget crisis, the scheme was then canned for a number of years. But thankfully it came back up online in early 2012, where we dusted off the paperwork and got back involved in getting the scheme up and running again, up and ready to get out on the ground in November of 2013. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Catthorpe interchange, or the notorious M1 Junction 19 as it was known on the travel news, it is located in the middle of the country, just east of Rugby, and it's where the M6, the M1 and the A14 collided, would be a nice way to put it. So you had the M1 travelling north and south, there was a slip road from the M1 to the M6, the M6 then came over the top of the motorway to rejoin the M1. And this is where the problem happened, is when someone stuck the A14 on the end of it, because the M6 came down, went round a couple of little roundabouts under a bridge and joined the A14. The A14 then came around, went up a bit of a farm track, joined a slip road and went up onto the M6. A couple of slip roads were put in for good measure, and then right through the middle of it all there was a local link road linking the local villages of Catthorpe and Swinford. The only problem being, right in the middle there under the M1 was a bridge that was built in the 1960s for the local farm traffic, which was now being used to funnel the entire trans-European highway from the ports in the east of the country to the Midlands and the north. So the problems were quite obvious. 1,000 vehicles a day being sort of squeezed into 3 narrow lanes underneath an old bridge. So the improvement was needed because there was congestion, there was delays, there was long queues, and for anyone who has ever suffered back over them sort of 15 years of being stuck on the A14 and the M6. There was unfortunately horrific accidents as well. Numerous were serious, unfortunately a number were fatal. There was conflict between local communities and long distance traffic. Residents living in the villages of Catthorpe and Swinford had to compete with HGVs and the motorway traffic when trying to get their kids to school in the morning. And it was an absolute barrier, a blocker to pedestrians, cyclists and horse riders in the community. So the key scheme objectives were to improve the safety for the road user, improve the journey time reliability, and during the public consultation it became very apparent from local communities they wanted complete separation from the motorway network and have their own local road network. Importantly, they had to provide value for money to the taxpayer and also offer a net biodiversity gain. And the value for money for the taxpayer was a key area throughout the entire process, from the early design development in the mid-2000s all the way up through the preliminary design and public inquiry. The ECI contract was challenging us to shaving off the money, challenging everything we designed. Bridges were removed after the 2010 budget challenge. We slimmed it down. We changed it from an all movements junction to a limited junction, which you'll see shortly. So this was the design solution, and at its heart was to provide a new free flow link right through the middle. Link the M6 with the A14 by constructing a new underbridge under the M1. We then provided free flow links from the M6 to the M1, from the M1 up to the M6. We built a new A14 to M1 northbound link over a new viaduct spanning the entire junction, and then constructed a new M1 to A14. Not providing all movements, but providing the solution that reduced the congestion on the road. It ticked all the boxes to ensure that traffic was flowing. There was no wasted links, unnecessary bridges. It was trimmed right down to the necessary. We also constructed 4 emergency access roads around the junction after collaboration with the emergency services so that they could provide all movements in case of incident. We also constructed a brand new local link road linking the villages of Catthorpe and Swinford and the other communities with the strategic network on the A5, completely separated from the new motorway interchange. We also upgraded and built new bridleways, just nearly 2 miles in total, around the River Avon, and upgraded River Avon and enhanced new biohabitats around the area. So a few headline figures in total: just 17 kilometres of new motorway network, 3 kilometres of new local roads, 6 new bridges were constructed for the interchange. We demolished 3 existing structures, constructed 12 portal gantries for the new managed motorways that were coming through. And one of the important ones there is 500,000 cubic metres of earthworks had to be excavated and retained in a tight site and reused for the construction of the new junction. All in all, scheme budget was about 190 million. But the key one for myself in planning this was the 157,000 vehicles a day that were traversing that junction. And first came the first challenge we had during the design and the construction. It's what I termed keeping that junction open for business. We had to build a brand new interchange on top of an existing junction. So at all times we could not just go out there and shut a few links down and get this junction built nice and easy offline. So from the very first moment of the ECI project, we were working closely with our traffic management contractors, with the designers, with Highways England, with the area maintainer, with the Leicestershire County Council, to ensure that the phasing was such that the traffic could continue to flow through the junction, albeit badly through the junction, but maintained to it. What we couldn't afford was people believing, because the construction works had started, that there was a net devaluation of that junction, that people would try to avoid it, use local rat runs. So we went out of our way to make sure we were designing and building these structures and new links in such a way that the new roads could run around, the existing roads could run around them. At the heart of the solution was construction of temporary carriageways, and in total we built 8 temporary roads, totaling about 5 kilometres of carriageway around the junction. The idea was to move traffic to the outside of the job, get in and where you can build some of the new links. Once the new links were open, divert the traffic on the temporary roads back onto the new links, and then slowly unlock the puzzle and open up the new junction. In total, there were over 22 construction phases and traffic management switches to get the junction completed. Obviously, that is where really the power of the ECI contract came in. You couldn't just do that in a couple of months while you were attending normally for a job. So working with all parties, we were able to spend a number of years designing it, developing it to get the right solution. The temporary roads, we also were challenged to make sure we weren't taking unnecessary land take, even if it was temporary. So the temporary roads sat within the footprint of the junction. Some became environmental mitigation areas where earthworks bundings would be formed, and a number, including in the top corner, which was the M6 to A14 temporary link, were later converted into the permanent local link road. So we only had to build one road once. And then once the temporary road was completed with and traffic was on its new alignment, we could rip it up, process it and convert it into ground improvement layer for the next bit of construction work on one of the new links. And what these roads offered us was minimum disruption for the road user, keeping the junction flowing. An example of one of these temporary roads, originally we had the M6 to M1 was going over an existing bridge to join the M1. We're looking at an overhead shot probably about 10 months into the scheme, and you can sort of get a feel for where the bridge construction's going on, and you can see where all the temporary roads are sort of mingling around the construction sites. What we did here with our designers was we actually created a temporary traffic management solution, divert that M1, the M6 to M1 traffic in a contraflow on the original M1 to M6 link, built a little wibble of a temporary road over the embankment and connected it back up to the Catford Viaduct. A simple temporary road meant that we could actually build one of the viaducts in a much simpler way, actually saving £1.5 million on construction costs and 3 months on programme. What it also meant was that one of the bridges here suddenly became isolated and obsolete a lot earlier in the programme, which was good news for me because I was looking for some decent crushed stone with the price of the imported stone going up. And in that bridge there was 3,000 tonnes of concrete that I could process into sub-base. So we formed a working group with our stakeholders, and the plan was we needed to get that bridge down very quickly, because underneath it is flowing the old A14 to M6 link. Incredibly busy link, and we then looked at the road profiling, looked at the traffic flows and identified the quietest period of time where we could do an extended closure to guarantee getting that bridge down. And we identified a period of time really between sort of Saturday evening and Sunday lunchtime in March. And now we had the timing, we then had to come up with a methodology to get the bridge down in the time period we had for the closure. So we appointed some demolition contractors and an explosives expert. And the best thing we could do really was to drill lots of holes into those supporting columns, inject them full of explosives and vaporise them. And that way, the deck that you see at the top would come crashing down onto a pre-constructed crash mat, and the excavators would get in, break it up, move it to the side, ready to open up the next morning. Nice and simple. The difficult bit was because we decided we wanted to use explosives to vaporise those columns, we need to isolate the entire junction for a 15-minute period. Now obviously we had to close the road going underneath, but we also had to close the entire M1, the entire A14 and the entire M6 and the local road. The problem is all the diversion routes for each of them routes coincide with each other. So we had to come up with a 15-minute solution that gave us 15 minutes clear window to bring the deck down and sound the all clear and reopen the road. So working with the Highways England traffic officers, the local council, our TM crews, the police, other emergency services, the local authorities, we came up with a synchronized rolling roadblock, one could say, on about 4 different links. And at a certain period, the go signal was given, traffic was brought to a halt a couple of miles outside the junction, and we had a very eerie 10 minutes with a sudden silence until there was an almighty explosion, the deck came crashing down, all clear was given, and we were able to open up 90% of the routes to flowing traffic. So the only one that was closed was obviously the A14 to M6. It was then quite a frantic clear-up operation, which you can see in the bottom photograph, where the machines went in, did progressive fragmentation on the deck at ground level. We then did a bit of a sweep-up exercise, and I'm pleased to say at 2 o'clock the next afternoon the road was open for business again. But it did offer a huge number of successes. We got 3,000 tonnes of crushed concrete right next to where I needed it for the new road construction. It created a larger work area in a Pacific traffic management phase. And for me, what it showed straight away was a great example of collaborative behaviours between multiple stakeholders. Saw a solution, saw an opportunity, and all supported to getting it delivered. And it was also a good use of multiple media outlets to advertise the complex closures and actually get the word out that one needed to avoid junction 19 on a certain Saturday in March. And actually the traffic flows were less that weekend than they would have normally been due to the advertising. And that brings us on to another good success of the scheme. And at first, I wasn't buying into it, and then I saw the success, and I'm now completely believe in it. And that's the use of social media to inform travellers, inform the travelling public and stakeholders. Along with Highways England, we set up and administered a Facebook page for the project. This was run really from about 6 months in, right the way through to the end, and it had multiple purposes. The first was inform travelling public of the upcoming closures. We provided schematics, easy to read maps on diversion routes, and we also then ran video run-throughs advising of the new links that were opened up. 22 different phases meant 22 different road configurations. People like the Road Haulage Association found it useful. Their members could get on and actually understand the new routes and where to take, how to drive through them. Great opportunity to answer questions, but there does come a catch to that. You need to make sure you're monitoring it constantly. The thing with social media, it's not just check on it once a week. We had a number of people that were authorised to administer it, but like with all questions and answers, making sure they got the clearance to put the answer in. So senior management had to be there ready to authorise quick responses, but incredibly useful. Rather than huge letter drops or responding to individual letters, simple questions could be raised up on here and answered almost immediately. And it was a great opportunity to post progress details and actually give people and show them behind the scenes. So when there's a closure on, you could actually show the 500-ton crane sitting in the middle of the M1, the reason for it, how gantries were lifted in, and people began to understand why the closures were needed and the complex work that was going on. Other successes on the scheme, for me a proud one was where we'd just opened up one carriageway of the new A14 M6 link, but we still had a bottleneck to unblock to create a free flow link. And we identified an opportunity to create a contraflow on the newly opened road that would completely eliminate the bottleneck on M1 Junction 19 5 months ahead of programme. And that was an opportunity too good to miss. So we sat down with a working group, again, with multiple stakeholders as part of the team. Emergency services, the local authorities, traffic officers, Highways England. And we came up and presented the solution. It was implemented. And then overnight, about 5 o'clock in the morning, M1 Junction 19's horror story pretty much ended. Albeit with temporary traffic management and the 50-mile-an-hour speed limit, but we had free flow traffic through the junction. And the feedback was immensely proud. Got fantastic feedback from commuters. And it's suddenly that bit that makes you proud to be a civil engineer, because suddenly people were telling you they were getting an hour back in the morning and an hour back in the evening from their commutes. And that's no mean feat. That's changing people's lives, that. It means they get back an hour earlier to see their family. So for me, the other successes on the project was the collaboration approach and the early contractor involvement. Key individuals were retained within the team for all the parties. So there was the experience there. You had strong relationships, not only with the client, but with the stakeholders, local community groups. You were recognisable, they knew who you were, and also they held you accountable because you were the one at the public exhibition telling them what you were going to do, and they remembered your face 6 months later. But it also meant there was the trust. So when we came up with mad ideas such as blowing up a bridge and putting a contraflow on a newly constructed road, the people involved knew you were going to do the job properly and supported the opportunity. And the scheme itself, I don't think could have been built in any other way. The sheer complexity of the traffic management meant that you needed contractors and specialist contractors involved early doors to work with all the stakeholders to develop a process and a programme that could be delivered, but also could be undertaken alongside the designer so they could design to meet that phasing requirement. Good opportunity to address construction and design risks very early in the process. So we can make decisions to use sustainable materials such as PFI in reinforced earth wing wall construction. We also identified exceptionally deep drainage, and working alongside the maintainer, it was agreed that pumping stations were not the correct solution because of the whole life costing. So we started looking at pipe jacking to ensure that we weren't putting people down into deep excavations, looked at all the different health and safety risks and came up with the best solution. But again, for myself, ECI meant that you got that relationship with the key stakeholders. They bought into the solution and travelled the journey with you to delivery. So a few shots really of before, during and after. So this is looking down the M6 towards the M1 on the old Junction 19 with the queuing traffic waiting to join the A14. And then during construction, you can see the traffic on its temporary alignment, construction work going on into the different isolated pockets. And then the opening of the free flow link and all the new links and the local road. And that was the benefit as well as the scheme. There was no great unravelling, no cutting of a ribbon. It was opened up pretty much after 18 months in the scheme. The benefits started being seen with the new roads being opened up. So people saw progressive betterment as the scheme went on. For me, this is my favourite one because this was the nightmarish junction between the local road and the existing A14 M6 link, and that was the bridge that we vaporised. And we converted it into a local link road. And for this was brilliant. This was the first morning we opened it up, and I think that was the first time in 2 decades that local community could walk between the two villages. So there was an entire generation of parents who couldn't walk their kids to school, and that morning you couldn't move down that footpath for buggies and prams and people walking down. And where we mentioned earlier in the presentations about how we make things different, how engineers and the Institute can make things better for people, this was it. Something as simple as a footpath suddenly changed people's lives. Got people walking. They weren't frustrated. They weren't queuing up in traffic. They weren't in a dangerous environment. And that simple football was a result of a collaborative response between Highways England and Leicestershire County Council, who will help sponsoring the scheme. So in the outcomes, with the free flow links all operational, we improved the safety for the road users. Accidents are reduced in the first year. We've improved the journey time reliability for over 150,000 people a day. And remember, a lot of that's trade route as well. So that's coming across from the ports at Felixstowe all the way over to the rest of the country. Local communities have a safe, reliable link for the first time in 20 years. And for cost to the taxpayer, well, we were working out the benefit to cost ratios during the start of the scheme. We were getting benefits of 5 to 1. We got a net biodiversity gain, created over 300,000 square metres of new habitat, including upgrades and river enhancements to the River Avon and helping to reduce flood risk. And I believe strongly we had engaged stakeholders throughout the process. People felt part of the scheme and saw it through its journey. And I was very proud of the collaborative behaviours that the ECI process brought out of people. And for myself as well, as being an ex-apprentice, fantastic to bring in a number of new apprentices through the whole life of the scheme as well, a number of graduate engineers, and a key one here is we actually brought on 3 graduate engineers from Highways England to work on their site placement. And if there are any clients in the room, I'd really recommend this, because we talk of collaboration, but if you really want to start it with the next generation of managers and engineers coming up through and get that relationship early. And I'm very proud to say that the whole project was delivered, 0 lost time accident, opened on time, under budget, and with minimal disruption to the travelling public. So thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for giving me the platform. Thank you.